everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk, sponsored by Inglis and Darley. I'm Bren O'Brien, and joining me as per usual is Tim Rowe. This week, we talk to Coolmore's Tom Moore about Super Seth strategy. Mark Chittick reflects on Savabeel's legacy, plus changes at the Oaks and new faces at Blue Gum. In racing, New Zealand's headaches, racing's richest people, Queensland's $200 million plan in chain, and a look at the final Group 1 of the racing season. While I'm wagering the $1.2 billion point of consumption windfall, what does it do for racing? Tim, let's just kick this off with a look ahead to the 2026 breeding season. We've seen a host of changes, none more significant, I'd say, probably than the addition of Super Seth to Coolmore. We sort of learned of that, I think it was in February, wasn't it? Late February, early March, Tim, we sort of learned that this might have been happening. We spoke about it a lot at the time, but sort of reflecting on it now, how big a deal is this, do you feel, both for Coolmore, but also, I guess the dynamic it creates within the industry?
It was actually February 19th, Bren, when we sort of learnt late on I'm not sure what day it was, but the 19th anyway, sort of got whispers that it was happening, and then Coolmore confirmed about, midnight really. I think I got, finished my story about midnight, and at the time it was, certainly significant, probably more so for Waikato Stud, and as we know what's happened last week with Savabeel and moving on, definitely even more significant, you could argue. But it's just going to be interesting how they, Coolmore do a great job marketing their stallions and garnering support, how they really get behind him, of which, Tom Moore does a fair job explaining that in the interview. And even just before recording this, Tom's at Karaka for the weanling sale, and probably not unexpectedly, they bought one Super Seth colt for $160,000 out of Laquita from Highline Thoroughbred, sort of late in the session there. Quite a few of I think there was at least 3 Super Seths that sold for 100 plus, and Tony Ryder bought one as well from Milan Park.
Yeah, we'll talk about Tony in a minute. We'll talk about Tom as well, Tom Moore as well, who we chatted to earlier in the week. Obviously, he was headed to New Zealand, so we got him in time. But it was an interesting reflection, wasn't it, Tim? I guess on how this strategy is not just about capitalising on a stallion that's had an amazing start to his career in terms of Group 1 winners to runners and all those types of figures, but also needing to capitalise on a broodmare band they've invested significantly in over the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, definitely those we know. Sunlight. I know they bought plenty of nice mares before Sunlight, but that's the one that sort of stuck out to me, during COVID, or the sort of, we were up there on the Gold Coast, 4.2 million, and then Yulong's, that probably turbocharged or encouraged Yulong to really get active. But Coolmore, every year buy quite a few really high value, expensive mares, and they've got to make it work. They've got to have the stallions to get it back in the sales ring or on the racetrack.
And here's our extensive chat with Tom Moore early in the week. And joining us now on Straight Talk is Tom Moore, marketing and nominations at Coolmore Australia. Tom, thanks for joining us. It's been a couple of months, I suppose, since Coolmore confirmed it has secured Super Seth. It's one of the biggest deals we've had in recent history in Australia in terms of stallion deals. It certainly made plenty of headlines. I mean, what was the point, sort of, that the wider Coolmore team was aware that a deal of this magnitude around Super Seth could be on the cards? I mean, it must have been an exciting time when you sort of learnt that you guys would get access to a stone of this quality.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bren. Well, I suppose there's a fair bit to unravel in that question, but it all seemed to happen very quickly. Naturally, an operation such as Coolmore is always on the lookout for top-end stallions and top-end bloodstock in general, not only in Australia but all throughout the world. So when the opportunity arose to be put into a position where you might be a chance of purchasing a horse like Super Seth, who's only 9 years old, Tom and a few of the guys jumped on a plane and headed over to Waikato to meet with the Chittick family and inspect the horse, inspect some of his stock on the ground. Obviously, we'd been keeping an eye on him. He had emerged very quickly as a sire of real significance. So he was on our radar, but not that we ever thought it'd be possible that we might be able to lure him to Coolmore. But it's something that's happened in the past. Something similar has happened with Wooden Bassett, for example, who was procured from France to come to Ireland. And obviously he sadly passed away last year, and we lost So You Think as well. And Fastnet Rock is no longer with us. So we needed a proven stallion, and the opportunity arose to be able to buy into or take over the services of Super Seth. So within very little amount of time between the horse being put to us, then the deal was done. And yeah, he seemed to fit in to our stallion roster really well, and probably equally as importantly, he's really he's a point of difference to a horse like Home Affairs, who is another emerging young proven stallion. So we have to identify stallions and proven stallions to send our own broodmare band to, and we've invested a lot of money in that. So to have access to a horse like Super Seth to service our own mares as much as anything is extremely appealing.
What just touching on that, Tom? So was Super Seth put to you or put to Coolmore, or did you go, Tom Magna and John Magna go sort of seeking out Mark Chittick and the Waikato about possibly Super Seth being on the market?
I don't know that Super Seth was ever on the open market, but conversations obviously took place between the Chittick family and the Magna family and various other equity partners in Super Seth with Tom and his family, and I suppose very quickly after the initial conversations were had, then a deal was done, or as quickly as possible as a deal could be done of that magnitude.
Yeah, and I guess there's always when you have a deal like this, there's always a strong reaction from the industry in terms of like, I guess, newsworthiness and people talking about it, whatever. But I mean, how quickly did that sort of turn into that buzz? I suppose external parts turn into the fact that you guys and the Noms team would have been busy fielding inquiries, etc. What has been the response to breeders to I guess, the accessibility to Super Seth being in Australia and being a Coolmore, Tom?
Well, there's been a phenomenal interest in him from the moment that we announced him. The phone was running hot. We got access to him, and we got him over here very quickly after the deal was done. We put on a day where we invited a lot of local breeders to come and see him. But and a lot of what he's done, both on the track himself and with his progeny, has been in Australia. So he's he's a name that people know through his progeny and through his deeds on the racetrack. A Caulfield Guineas winner trained by the Freedmans in Melbourne. 3 Group 1 winners in Australia from his first crop. So he's a stallion that people know. And in a time where there is a lack of high-class proven stallions such as Super Seth, yeah, he's really fallen on a lot of people's radar.
Some of the initial shareholders in Super Seth, certainly Jonathan Munns, who raced him, I know he's retained all his equity in the stallion, and he, I imagine, will be backing into the hilt come this season. He does have as we know, a very, very good broodmare band.
Yeah, he's supported him every year. He's had a lot of luck in doing so. He's bred linebacker. He raced a filly like Ruska Roma, who's not yet done on the racetrack. She's a stakes winner out of a Mac female, and he'll continue to support him with some of his better mares, which he's already confirmed for this season. So, yeah, to have the weight of a broodmare band such as Jonathan Munns and now Coolmore and also Waikato, who'll continue to support him behind the horse like Super Seth is extremely exciting, extremely encouraging. And he's only a young horse, so where what we've seen on the track so far for Super Seth, he's only just getting going.
I mean, he's not an unfamiliar sideline to Coolmore, obviously a grandson of High Chaparral and that famous, Sadler's Wells line. Have you got a view of sort of what sort of mares will do and will suit Super Seth in Australia?
Well, he's quite a versatile stallion. He's had a champion 2-year-old already in La Dorada. He's had 2 Guineas winners in Linebacker and Feroce, and he's had a Derby winner in Maison Louis. He's got a pretty talented 3-year-old there with Chris Waller in the way of Kilman. But obviously, he's covered a load of O'Reilly mares, Savabeel mares. He seems to work very well with McPhee mares for whatever reason. But he's going to be exposed to a much different group of mares here in Australia, probably a faster group of mares. And that was one of the things that appealed to us in terms of our own mares and bringing him to Australia is how versatile he appears to be. He's produced a horse like Linebacker, who's a fast horse. He won a Silver Eagle and he won a Guineas at Randwick in Sydney. But he's out of an Oasis Dream mare, who's out of a Timber Country mare, who's out of a Dionysus mare. Feroce is out of an O'Reilly mare, who's a half sister to De Beers, who's a middle distance horse. So when paired with mares that we're going to send to him, fast mares, a load of I'm Invincible mares that we've got down for him because they can't go to home affairs. So mares like Estriella and Tis Invincible and Cool and Gata, not that she's an I'm Invincible mare, but top class fast mares. We really think that he's capable of producing the types of horses that we go to the sales wanting to buy, which is horses that can win races like the Golden Rose and even the Coolmore and the Golden Slipper. He was a Guineas winner himself, but he won 5 races and 4 of them were over 1,200 metres. His Grand Dam is a fast mare by Rory's Jester. So we think he's more than capable of producing those fast, early, precocious horses that the market so desires here in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned those sprinting mares. That's a key part, I guess, a key asset for him going forward is to have access to those. What about some of your other mares? I mean, when you're trying to look for, you bring a stallion across, you support him, you paid the money, you know, you guys have obviously got a wealth of very highly credentialed mares. I mean, how do you make the decision which ones are best to go to him? And have you sort of, you mentioned a few there to that I'm Invincible. You also mentioned the Cool and Gatter as well, who's another high class mare. What other ones have you sort of have you got on the agenda for him this season?
Well, a good chunk of our mares are going to go to home affairs and Super Seth, and that's a logical thing to do. And when you've got quite a sizable portfolio of mares and you've got what we believe are the 2 best young stallions in the country, it makes sense to put a load of weight behind them. That's not to say that we're not going to be supporting our other young stallions as well. But in addition to those I'm Invincible mares that I mentioned and Cool and Gatter, we've also got the dam of Storm Boy penciled down for Super Seth. So Pelican will be going to him. A mare like Booker, who was a very fast mare, Avantage, Champagne Cuddles, Shout the Bar, Amelia's Jewel, who we think is nailed on for Super Seth. She's a pretty mare, medium size, obviously highly talented race mare. Then you've got a mare like Tiggy Wiggy, who's the dam of Central Europe, a top class 2-year-old this season, and a whole lot of the Hips Don't Lie family and a few of her daughters that we've got down to go to Super Seth this year. So he's getting the cream of the crop. And when Coolmore goes and makes an investment such as the one that they have made in Super Seth, they put all the weight behind them and they'll leave no stone unturned in order to make sure that he achieves his potential. They did it with Wooden Bast in the past. They've done it with like Justify and we'll put everything into making sure Super Seth is a success at Coolmore.
And given you're not managing from the start, he's got a big crop of in-foal mares in New Zealand and a sort of improving probably weanling crop compared to the early days. Do you know how Coolmore, probably in conjunction with Waikato, are going to manage that in terms of possibly getting some of the better ones to some of the Australian sales, perhaps particularly Easter and maybe Magic Millions, to sort of really commercialise him and get him in front of the big yearling buyers and syndicators in Australia?
Well, as I mentioned before, a lot of the success that he's had on the track has been here in Australia. And like New Zealand's premier sale at Karaka in January is a great sale, but I don't think there's room for 100 odd Super Sets. So they're going to have to be spread out amongst some of the Australian sales. I'm actually jumping on a plane tomorrow to go to New Zealand and we'll have a conversation with the Chitticks as to what the best way is to manage that. But in terms of the Australian yearling buying bench, there's a huge appetite for them. But, and some of the major stables throughout the country have had great success with them. So it makes sense to supply the Australian sales at Inglis and Magic Millions with some of the better Super Sets. Certainly we'll be seeing more and more Super Sets as the years go on, starting in 2029 with the Coolmore brand on them. But we'd be delighted to offer some on behalf of New Zealand breeders. And there's a weaning sale there on Thursday with 9 Super Sets, and we'll see if there's one that we might be able to bring back over this side of the Tasman.
Tom, you mentioned before about, you mentioned Home Affairs, and he'll be a dominant winner of the first season champion, season sire this season. He's had a great Great run. I mean, how is your roster setting up? Obviously, you spoke about the fact you've had some, I guess, generational change, probably unintended in some ways with the passing of, say, Fink and Wooten Bassett. But, you know, your confidence is there that, like, Coolmore's well set up. It's got these two, I guess, key pillars you've talked about, Super Seth, home affairs, you can build upon, but you've got the strength around them to ensure that, that Coolmore name could be up there at the, top of the charts, for years to come.
Well, like I said before, we think with Home Affairs and Super Seth, who are only 7 and 9 years old respectively, we've got two of the best, if not the best, young stallions in the country. An operation such as Coolmore needs top-end proven stallions, and we wouldn't trade them in for anything. So it's a pretty exciting position to be in. Home Affairs has done something which is pretty rare in that he produced a golden slipper winning colt in his first crop, and we were lucky enough to be able to purchase Guest House subsequently, so he'll join him on the roster one day. And obviously Super Seth starting better at stud than almost any New Zealand stallion in history. So to have them on the roster, both commanding fees in excess of $100,000, both in the very formative stages of their careers at stud, it's going to be a pretty exciting 10 years ahead for Coolmore.
Yeah, so plenty to sort of chew over there, Tim, and we've sort of reflected on it before the chat, but there's plenty to talk to, sort of think about what they may look like. Because as we know with these things, whether the value that Coolmore can get out of this deal will be determined, not in the next 12 months, but in the next 5 to 10 years, and that's the nature of the game as well. And we know how hard it is to replace, important, influential stallions like so you think of Wooten Bassett. I mean, Waikato have got their own challenges now, Tim. Obviously, they've Super Seth's gone now, and we obviously learnt last week, I think last Friday it was, that Savabeel had died in a paddock accident, which is a very sad end for an amazing stallion for Waikato Stud. But that really does. I mean, I know that Savabeel's, I guess, fertility and activity in terms of his availability would have been less and less, but it does sort of definitely make this a time of transition for Waikato and arguably for the broader New Zealand industry, Tim.
Mark told me sort of 25 to 30 mares he got in foal last year, and he was intended to cover shareholder mares this year. Probably, ideally would have got a similar number of mares in foal, but he was rising 25. This day was coming at some point. Just didn't. Sadly, it was sort of just in his box when he went to be fed, as he has been for 21 years there at Waikato. He just, for whatever reason, brittle bones as people get older. Same with horses. Unfortunately, wasn't in pain for long. That's the plus side. They well looked after him, and he's been buried in front of his box, which, Mark explained that, that's going to become a memorial and quite a sad time, but more for reflection of just what a great horse he was as a stallion, and really changed New Zealand and Waikato's fortunes.
And here's a bit of what Mark Chittick had to say on in the week, reflecting upon Savabeel.
There are a couple of very special bottles of wine that I've had for a number of years, and usually it would have been opened on a celebration, but I thought it was very pertinent. Well, it was a celebration. It was a celebration of his life, and one of the first people outside of the farm that I rang was obviously Rogie, and he just said the best word. And just, we've had a lot of bright times, and that's what we've got to remember and celebrate. So that's what we were doing. There was no real significance of this, other than it was just a really nice day, and we'd had this little burial, so he's buried right outside his box. And his box we are going to turn into a memory of him.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, Waikato had some, O'Reilly, some great stallions, but something about Savabeel very, very special. And did he sort of change your life, I guess, the whole, Gary and your children coming through as well?
Oh, 100%. Like at the end of the day, you did right. We've had our fair share of champion stallions and really good stallions, but he is the best of them. When you're closing in on the New Zealand record of stakes winners, and it was interesting in one of the articles that I picked up the other day. I think I read it right, and that Savabeel was sitting on 142 at exactly the same stage, and Sev sitting on 159, and so with 7 to go to equal. So whether he gets there or not will be it'll be a huge accolade. But yeah, going back to the 22 or 23 years with the kids, Charlotte was obviously here, was born just before him, George around about the same time, and obviously Harry and Charlie went. So for those ones in particular, he's been here longer than them. So certainly, I think this thing for me is definitely part of the whole family, the whole farm and everybody. And special mention must go to Ryan Figgins, that's looked after him so well for the last number of years, and before him, Dave O'Leary. Both those guys have looked after him probably 50% each of the time that he's been at the farm, and have done that so well. But I suppose for me, it's just, I mean, he gave more Saturdays to celebrate hard than most, and we certainly did that. But the achievement, what he's achieved, and is still achieving, and as we've said so many times, 2-year-olds through to older horses, fillies, colts, sprinters, stayers, broodmare sire, all of those things. Like, he really is. He's just the best.
And hopefully there's a little bit more to come. Obviously, probably some unraced 2-year-olds and certainly yearlings and weanlings, and I don't know how many mares he's got in foal, but there's hopefully a little bit to come yet.
100%. Like, I think it was 25 or 30 that he ended up with in foal, and as you say, they are still to come. And he's been a very, very healthy and happy horse right up until until Friday morning, I suppose. So there was one quick decision that had to be made. It didn't linger on. So he's hung up his cue, and we're extremely proud of what he has done, what he is doing.
The following segment is brought to you by Darley. The Darley roster is one of the real talking points this season, and the numbers show why. New for 2026 are Tentaris and Observer, 2 exciting additions to a 16-strong roster. Across the group, you're looking at 43 Group 1 wins, 81 Group wins, 87 stakes wins, 12 champion titles, and 8 race or track records broken. And when you're a breeder, that's exactly what you want to see. Horses with the race records, the quality, and the substance to give you confidence. Go to darley.com.au for more details. Yeah, so it's obviously hard when you lose a stallion. We've lost a few big ones in the last couple of years. Schnitzel obviously last year, Fastnet Rock. Obviously we spoke about Say Think and Wooten Bass at Savabeel as well. Not in their class, but I'd love to acknowledge, got a message today from Waikato Stud, Tim in here in Tasmania, that Tough Speed has died at age 29. And look, he was never up there with those types of stallions, but he was certainly a wonderfully versatile stallion, American bred horse that came to Tassie and really made an impact for those day-to-day horses. And, I said, studs feel those losses, don't they? And that's important as well. Speaking of studs and changes, Tim, it was interesting report during the week. The one we've been waiting on for a little while has been the transaction involving the Oak Stud in New Zealand and what might happen there. But it wasn't the buyer we thought it might be.
No, I was starting to doubt my sources there, having, a deal was imminent, and I was sort of, again, was doubting myself and questioning what I'd got wrong or who was I speaking to that sent me down the garden path. But doing a bit more research and speaking to Rick Williams from the Oak Stud and the eventual buyer, Tony Ryder from Milan Park, who's the neighbour of the Oak Stud. No, there was a Hong Kong consortium that we're going to buy the Oak Stud, and I think they were still on the cards up until 10 days ago. But Tony Ryder sort of just had a light bulb moment, or a what if. I didn't want any regrets, and he came forward, made an offer, an unconditional offer, and it's been bought and will be settling next July, the end of the 2026-27 racing season, effectively, which is good for the industry in terms of Tony. It'll stay a thoroughbred stud, and he'll expand his numbers. And he's a great guy, Tony, and I think it is a positive for the industry. What happens to that Hong Kong consortium will be interesting. They have been buying breeding stock, so hopefully they persist with that. Maybe they don't have the farm, but hopefully they continue to invest in bloodstock this year and for years to come.
Yeah, there's plenty of places to put horses if you don't own the farm. So, I'm sure they'll be able to find a deal, but they might as well do that at the moment. The other one I wanted to sort of touch on too with Tim was, look, I mean, I'll give Jason and Mel Stenning and their investment at Blue Gum has been, they've had a reasonable crack there, I suppose. Certainly at the sort of part of the stallion market there within. They lost Shajardin, I think, in the last 12 months, Tim, which obviously was a blow to them, sort of having building him up through. But they've sort of backed themselves back in on this stallion strategy by announcing this week that both Libertad, who is the Winterbottom Stakes winner, and Coleman, who is a Golden Slipper runner-up colt, will be both standing at Blue Gum this year. Interesting development. I think it sort of does, we need those, to be felt, we need those $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 stallions to continue to provide for the industry, especially if we're going to have affordable bloodstock moving forward. And it's good on them for having enough of a crack to make this, try to make this work. Given they've already got Flying Artie and also Oxley Road at the start, it's good to see them sort of getting their numbers back up again.
Yeah, they came in and sort of ran COVID as well, and really Jason and Mel, and then bought Blue Gum. They've invested a lot of money. They did have shares in both Libertad and Coleman. They raced both those horses, and so I know Libertad. You probably could have bought Libertad if you're a stud. I mean, they've decided, for whatever reason, they've decided to keep him, and it makes commercial sense, I think, or financial sense to do that. They're really getting behind the farm, Blue Gum. I know they've bought additional land sort of nearby, and from talking to Colin McCullough and that works for them, and other people, they're really loving the farm life at Euroa, which is what you need. Yes, they brought a lot of capital to the game and invested a lot, but passion's what drives, keeps people in the industry, and the fact that they're enjoying it and continuing to invest in stallions and broodmares. They bought quite a few broodmares with Suman Hedge this year, backing their stallions and outside stallions. I think it's, again, a bit like Tony Ryder and Milan and the Oak Stud. It's important for Victoria that Blue Gum's successful and there's options there for breeders, and hopefully one, two, three of them all become commercial, or commercial success stories.
On to the racing world, Tim, and a story we've been picking around about for a little while now is these issues in New Zealand, and feels like we're running a New Zealand edition of the Straight a little bit at the moment because there's plenty of stories coming out of there. But the advisory committee, the TAB New Zealand Advisory Committee report, which bits and pieces have been leaked over the last little bit, officially came out this week, is an interesting read. Some quite significant, I guess, proposals about where racing should be, none of which are necessarily, I guess, absolutely surprising given the way are. But I think what it is clear that, and it became clear through what Winston Peters, the racing minister over there, sort of put out, is that there needs to be movement and resolution. There's enough of reports, enough of saying what we're going to do, enough of sort of dillying and dallying. It's time to actually, for the racing industry, to take action, lest it risk a significant financial impact over the next few years.
So that's basically, as Winston said, the two parties, the NZTR administration and Russell Warwick, a lovely guy, as we know. Westbury Stud is chairman of that, and Matt Balesti, who spoken to the Straight multiple times about where the industry is heading or how they're trying to tackle it. There's probably needs to be, those two bodies need to come together and work, and try and work in one direction as much as possible, and a clear messaging, I think, needs to be for the industry to try and give the industry some confidence. Yesterday, NZTR came out with their sort of response to the recommendations put forward by the advisory group, and in the first sort of release said, they haven't got prize money funding assured yet for next season, and then it was sort of updated saying, no, they'll guarantee those funding for the next 3 months. The industry needs some certainty about what that stake money will be, whether it has to go down or whether it'll be the same. Certainly, can't forecast it'll be going up, but hopefully in the next few weeks, there's a lot of, for the greater good of the industry, they all come together, and certainly the short term forge what the next season's going to look like revenue wise and prize money wise, because there's just a lot of uncertainty at the moment, and they need to find the common ground of things they can agree on.
Yeah, there's a lot to work through here, isn't there? And I think what was interesting too was Winston Peters' reaction was that you guys have got to sort your own stuff out before we're going to do anything from a government perspective. They've got enough on their agenda coming up, over the next few months without having to and because among the recommendations were tax and regulatory reform to sort of, fix up a few of the, I guess, create more incentives and create, a better environment for that. Well, that's probably not going to happen in the short to medium term. And, Winston Peters' message was pretty clear. And it was also a little bit of stuff about the giving TAB in New Zealand some options around the betting and gaming settings, talking about possible casino licenses. We've spoken about that in New Zealand. So I don't think that will happen. I think, and fair enough, given we've been talking about a lot of these issues for well over a decade in New Zealand, the government's pretty much saying, you need to sort yourself out and you need to work out what you got and what you haven't got before we work out what we're going to do for you. And I think it sort of mirrors what the government attitude is probably a little bit around Australia as well. It's like, we won't interfere unless we have to. We'll get into discussion about Queensland in a minute, but it's just a really interesting time for New Zealand racing, and there is pressure on, and there are factions, and there are powerful people that have got some opinions, and other powerful people have got another opinion. You hope that they can get together and work this out, Tim, because there is long-term damage that could be done to the New Zealand industry. And only 3 years ago, we were talking about Entain walking in there, and it was going to be a massive breath of fresh air and change things. The same issues still persist by the look of things.
There's an election coming up at the end of the year, so from a MP's perspective or a government's perspective, there's probably not a lot of upside to rushing something through through Parliament. So that'll have to wait till those big picture items will have to wait till after the election, and whether Winston Peters holds his seat or the party and his power as racing minister. So that's another thing altogether. As I said, a big plank of that advisory board is the consolidation of assets and possibly the selling off of tracks or land, and which is contentious, of course. If you're associated with a certain region or a certain track, you don't want your local to go. And there's been criticism that under the advisory boards there's too much focus, or even NZTR, I should say, too much focus on Ellerslie, which is the pinnacle track in New Zealand, as opposed to the regional tracks. And it is a very fine balance, and I can see both sides of it.
Absolutely perfect segue into Queensland, which has got the same issue. It's got a lot of tracks around the state, well over 100, that it's trying to, that's part of this deal. So earlier this week, the Queensland budget was delivered. It did confirm that it was $200 million for the Future Fund. Those two $200 million lots were put in different parts of the budget, which was interesting enough, and certainly caused a few flutters on my phone for a while there, Tim, on Tuesday when we're trying to work out where the money's going to come from. This hopefully sets up Queensland racing to do things going forward. Whether they can do what they need to do with $200 million is the question mark. There is funding included. There's a debate about when that funding should have been included, but for $25 million basically to demolish the John Power stand at Eagle Farm and rebuild some facilities, but not to rebuild a stand in its place. Now, that is believed at some point when an agreement is made that it will take the form of a loan from that future fund back to the Brisbane Racing Club in order to hopefully fund the redevelopment of that stand and a rebuilding of that stand. But then beyond that, we've got all these other things. We've got, Toowoomba and Marburg harness tracks. We've got Bundaberg straight greyhound tracks, all of which are a little bit, I guess, politically motivated and perhaps questionable from a return on investment point of view. You hope that this certainty gives Racing Queensland the ability to push forward. They still don't have a permanent CEO. I know that's probably not far away, an appointment there and what that's looking at, but Lachlan Murray's been doing a pretty good job for the last 15, 16 months or so. Racing needs certainty. Politics and racing are always dangerous when mixed together. We spoke about that in the last episode, Tim, but I think, it's an issue for Queensland. There's some progress to be made there still. I guess the money's now there. Now it's about the deliverability, and we've seen in New Zealand that doesn't always happen, does it, Tim?
And sort of, you followed that Queensland story closer than me, but on budget day, sort of reading some of the mainstream press with the Olympics coming up, there is going to be, well, certainly major budget pressures, and to fund the Olympics and other normal infrastructure and projects. Who takes the cut? And racing, is going to have to work very hard to lobby and make sure they're getting their fair share to get these important projects over the line, I would think.
Yeah, I think the $200 million is it for now. They won't get any more from the government. Given they got 80% cut of pot, they won't get any more. Talking about getting cut of the cash, Tim, you covered a story this week about racing's richest people, and I had a look at the Australian Financial Review's top 200 wealthy list from about a month ago, and sort of picked out a few key racing stories out of it. But what stood out most to you about that, Tim, about that story? I mean, I obviously, it there's some massive investors in racing and bloodstock. Yeah, and what stood out to you from that? From the fella looking through that list.
Oh, well, there's obviously discretionary income or spending is, that's what racing sort of relies on. And, obviously the wealthy individuals that affords them the opportunity if they're captivated by racing, and there's quite a few of them. And what the angle I took on that story, which was briefly met Mike Gregg in Mulberry Racing and Lachlan Sheridan, his grandson, and obviously Brad Widdop's the trainer and great guy Brad as well, good Riverina lad. I sort of took the angle there. He was in the rich list 150th last year, and he missed the cut this year. Just, I guess those guys, still very wealthy, but you're beholden to the share market a little bit and where your sort of assets lay, and so it can be quite volatile. But he's still investing a lot in racing and fairly new. It's still a fairly new business. I know they had at least two winners at Hawkesbury on Tuesday. They were pretty promising young horses. So I think Mulberry Racing here to stay for a fair while, I would think, and got some nice horses with their sort of data-driven model that they're pursuing. And then, of course, there's the usual names: Nigel Austin's been around for a long time, Rosemont, Cotton On. Jonathan Munns has spent a lot of money at the yearling sales the last few years, and certainly this year at Easter. He had another good year professionally, business-wise, according to the Financial Review, and there's a few others as well, of course, that, hopefully their business interests continue to go well so they can continue to buy and breed and own horses.
Yeah, and some of these people are selective in the market, like Nick Wacken is an example. That his wealth has gone through the roof in the last 5 or so years through his lithium investments, but he's still relatively selective about where he sticks into the market. He does like to buy at the reasonable, sort of higher end of the market. But no, it is interesting sort of how these guys are sort of applying their wealth, and it's really important for racing. We talk about contributions from government and contributions from various funding and wagering, all that sort of stuff. There's a discretionary amount of money that comes into racing through bloodstock. Those things don't happen. Like, if you look at the money that came in, I've been listening to the audio book, The Horse Trader one with Robert Sangster. You look at the money that came into the industry back then. A lot of that was discretionary income. It wasn't people sitting there thinking, we're definitely going to make our money back. Racing does need that money to flow through, and that makes it important as well. One of the people that has previously featured on that list is John Singleton, Tim, and it's a good little segue into Gerringong. He's fully using, and Mary's going around as one of the favourites in the Tats Tiara on Saturday.
Yeah, that mare's changed stables recently. Went to Chris and Corey Muntz and aimed at the Group 1. Did run very well first up, and so it can be quite a valuable win if she can land the Group 1. I guess it is maybe arguably one of the weaker Group 1s, sort of looking at the field at the moment, but time will tell. And there is a patent committee meeting coming up next month, so maybe whether that race is put on the warning list, I'm not sure. I mean, the Graham Begg's got Splash back, and speaking of Jonathan Munns, he's got Tullery's in the race as well for Peter Snowden.
Yeah, and he's got a good record. We've also got Manal in there as well, and within the law. So, look, I would say it's a good quality mares race, but is it the best addition to this race we've seen? No way. It's probably going to fall short of the mark unless we're going to see a freak performance. But look, I mean, I guess it's a challenge. We could talk about sort of, what races deserve to go up and down as much as we want. But anyway, it is the last Group 1 race of the year, and it'd be interesting to sort of reflect back on that. Obviously, it's been a year that's been dominated from a Group 1 sense, by Chris Waller and James McDonald. The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. Inglis, Australia's leading thoroughbred auctioneer and one of the most respected names in global horse racing and breeding, is excited to announce the return of the Inglis Internship Program, for which applications are now open. Inglis Internship is a full-time position that provides a successful candidate the chance to gain an in-depth insight and understanding to all facets of the racing and breeding industries across the entire Inglis business. To apply for the Inglis Internship, send a current CV with appropriate references and a cover letter explaining why you're a worthy candidate to internship@inglis.com.au. Applications close on July 3. Tim will round off our tour of all topics of the straight and wagering, as we often do. I've just put up an article about, I guess, gambling tax contribution to Australian taxation and where point of consumption tax sits within that. I thought it was an interesting sort of time to do it because the state budgets are all done now, so you can pretty much just go through the figures and work out on an Excel spreadsheet, as I have, because that's how I work on things. AI is not quite into the conversation yet with me, but have a look at how much money is actually generated through gambling tax on a state-by-state level, but also by point of consumption. So if you look at it there's $151 billion generated in taxation from state governments in Australia, state and territory governments in Australia. Of that, 10.5 billion, or around 6.9%, is from gambling. And of that gambling amount, 1.25 or $27 billion is from point of consumption tax. Now, point of consumption tax didn't exist until 2017, so it's obviously a new revenue source for the government. It continues to grow, despite the fact it probably hasn't grown at the rates government have wanted it to. What is interesting when you sort of look at it from a raw number point of view is that point of consumption tax is delivering roughly 300 and, so my numbers are right here, I'm just going to double check that. I'll triple check. No, 615 million. Sorry, Tim, I got that number right now. $615 million back into the racing industries, three codes, through funding agreements. Now, it's really become an important thing, Poch. It's a really important thing to monitor, I think, for the racing industry, because it gives us an idea of what the broader engagement is, but also whether the tax regimes are working. There's lots of discussion around Queensland at 20%, whether they should have come back. The ATC are at the ACT, not the ATC, getting confused with my acronyms there, are at 25%. Yeah, is that too high of a rate, and how does that work? I mean, all of this sort of rolls back to how racing should be funded moving forward, and all the conversations we have, whether it be New Zealand, whether it be Queensland, whether it be all the stuff we've talked about today, comes back into how racing is funded and how that's going to work, Tim. So it's an interesting one. I mean, do you feel, should racing become more reliant on pot, or is there a worry there that at some point that either the amount of money being generated has got to peak and sort of peter out a little bit, and also that other areas, i.e. sports bodies, are going to start coming after pot?
Look, there's smarter people than me, and I thought I was listening to Bill Evans, from chief economist from Westpac, there for a second. So maybe we can get a sponsorship from Westpac. But anyway, look, it comes down to the overall, for me, from a punting perspective, the overall tax that the bookmakers have to charge to, break even effectively, or I'm not, as I've said ad nauseum, no one's entitled to win, and that includes the bookmakers. I think it's, it is up and down, so like a poker machine. But at the moment, you would think that I would argue the taxes have gone too far, and whether that's the POC element to it or just general turnover taxes and other elements, it's made the attractiveness of gambling on racing and sport, for that matter, quite or less appealing, I think, just because there's more churn for your dollar going through. You lose more quickly, and I think even 10 years ago, horses that were 6 to 4 or $2.50 are now $2.10 and things like that. It feels that way. Maybe it's the market's got smarter, but I don't think that's good for the longer term of the industry and how the taxes are structured to make it more appealing. I think it's something that PRAs have to tackle, and obviously, hopefully, at some point, the governments realise that too, that laissez-faire sort of theory and things like that come into play.
There's a bit of detail around that.
I should say.
I was going to say, yeah. There's a bit of detail around that in the state budgets that were released this week, Queensland, New South Wales, around about whether it's actually probably New South Wales exceeding what the expectations were, but not exceeding. This is pot, not exceeding what it was. I guess, not exceeding what it was probably expectations were a couple of years ago. I guess what the interesting thing is in New South Wales is that arrangement may change depending on what goes on. I know the funding arrangement's not part of the discussions for the Hazard review, but I think at some point that will come up as a discussion. It certainly will by, I think it's 2033 when the New South Wales deal comes up for Tabcorp. So there's a bit to work through on that one. But I think you are right, Tim. I think the fact that when Pox came in, I remember I was working for punters.com.au back when it came in, and there was a really strong reaction from within the punting industry, I suppose, both from pro punters, but also from the wagering side, that this would be a tax on punters and be passed on. And that's what's happened. I mean, fundamentally, that the bookmakers will say, oh, we pay total taxes, fees, all that type of stuff, what we pay. But that comes off the price. And at the end, that's, that affects the ability to have more winning punters. And what we want to have is have more people who feel like they're getting a run for their money, Tim. Even if they're not, if they're losing punters, they're losing less. The last thing we want is a situation where we go, and I think what is interesting when you look at the fact that there's $10.5 billion collected by state governments who are also, on one hand, talking about, they're taking a lot of money taking a lot of money from gambling, given the challenges they say it presents. So for me, there's a bit of a conflict there as well. You hope that there's enough capability within those state governments to understand that it is a push and pull mentality. And as you mentioned before, if the taxes go up to a certain point, that will disincentivize people. And it is also, to be honest with you, Tim, if you're talking about harm minimisation, all putting up gambling taxes does is do more damage to people who have got issues. Now, I'm not saying with that's not the industry's responsibility to take care of those people, but that's what it does, because they're the high turnover people who actually get more and more sort of impacted by high taxes. But anyway, that's probably enough of that for now. Tim, anything else for you before we head off for the week?
Well, the first race, as we're recording it, Bendigo just won a Shalar of Shiraz. You might remember we're in the Premier sale. We're in the bus with Mitch Friedman going back, and he said he liked a Shalar and we should go in that horse. I think it's just won on debut, or certainly just won anyway. So we've missed another winner there that people trying to look after us.
Things I don't need to hear, Tim, as horses. I've hard enough. Yes, it's hard enough missing out on horses. Or sorry, it's hard enough when your horse doesn't win, let alone missing out on horses that do win. But as Mitch I assume Mitch has got ownership of that horse, has he? So it's under Mitch's name, is it?
It is, yes. Yeah, no, he's won. Yeah, paid $13 plus. So looks a nice horse. Hit the line well. A nice Shalar there. Woodside Park, underrated. Stallion possibly.
Oh, there you go. Good. Thanks for that. Thanks for the tip, Mitch. Thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk again for our live coverage of racing, which is probably something we didn't intend to do, given we're a pre-recorded podcast, but I'm sure it provides insights there somewhere. Thanks to our sponsors, Darley Inglis, do a great job and have been a long-term supporter of what we're doing here on Straight Talk. Don't forget to give us a rating where you listen to us, and be sure to subscribe. Be sure to sign up to the Straight daily newsletters and 7 days newsletters. Just go onto the front page, thestraight.com.au, put your name and email in there and sign up, because it's well worth doing that. Those newsletters are free and available to everyone. We've also got membership as well, which we've spoken about before. We've got a discount. There's a little code there. I think it's EAFY. Oh my goodness, 26. I think it is. I'll double check that in terms of what the actual code is, but there is a code available to those who want to get a discount on an annual subscription. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next week.